Welcome to everyone for our discussion. Today in this panel, we are going to be talking about education and training for a rapidly changing economy. As Lauren said, I'm with Maher Maher, which is an affiliate of the American Institutes for Research, and we do talent development consulting with communities, states, the federal government, and private sector. And I'm very honored and excited to be back with the Western Governors Association and all of you getting to have this conversation. As Lauren said, back in 2018, we collaborated and created what is now the current policy around workforce development. That's 3 years old, and a great deal has changed in the last 3 years. A lot of the things that 3 years ago we talked about occurring over the next decade related to the future of work have been thrust upon us and have accelerated all of the changes that we knew were coming in a way that I don't think any of us were truly prepared for. I've seen great innovation come of that, the amazing ability for organizations, individuals, education, businesses to adapt and be flexible. And now we have an opportunity to reflect while we are working to recover and learn from what we've been through and figure out how to make us even stronger going forward. So we're excited to have this conversation and this great panel today to think about, to really contemplate what is our current state and how might we come out of what we've been through over the last year or more stronger and better than ever before, and more prepared for the future of work, for a changing work environment, a changing worker, changing policies, and really critical issues to organizations and companies and individuals in the West. Our human capital is our single most important resource if we truly want to grow and thrive in our Western communities. So with that, I would like to welcome our first panelist. Each of our panelists will spend about 5 to 7 minutes giving us an overview of the work that they do. And then following each overview, we're going to have some Q&A. And we encourage folks to put some questions in the chat. Lauren's going to help us watch for those. And we also have some prepared questions for the panelists. So how about if we start with, I just lost my list. So bear with me, guys. I hope I don't go out of order. I believe we are going to start with Julie. Julie Squire, can you please share an overview with us?
Thank you so much, Stephanie. Thank you, Lauren, and thank you to the Western Governors Association for inviting me to this event, and I look forward to this discussion. So NASWA is the National Association of State Workforce Agencies. We are nonprofit and we are nonpartisan, and we're a member-driven association of all of the state workforce agencies. So these are the agencies in your states delivering workforce training, employment, career, and business services, as well as unemployment insurance, veteran reemployment, and labor market information programs. So I'm very proud that all 50 states are members of NASWA. So anybody with a state, your state is a member of NASWA. Also, we have as members the District of Columbia, Virgin Islands, Puerto Rico, and Guam. And we are member driven, so we have a board of directors, and it is comprised of state agency leaders. Our current chair is Fitzgerald Washington. He is from the state of Alabama, the Alabama Department of Labor. And our current vice chair is Robert Acero Angelo. He's commissioner of the New Jersey Department of Labor and Workforce Development. Robin Cooley, who's director of the Wyoming Department of Workforce Services, is our current secretary. And we have board members from several Western states, including Alaska, Colorado, Hawaii, Nebraska, and Texas. So we are an advocate at the federal government level, and we also really focus on member services. And we have a number of member groups internally. So these groups include an employment and training committee that really focuses on workforce training. We have a technology committee, an equal opportunity committee, a legislative committee. We also have a workforce information technology support center. We call it WITSI. And that is a group that focuses on technology to support all WIOA programs. So I would encourage you, if you want to find out more about NASWA, we have our website, of course, naswa.org, for more resources or information. We also have a lot of information just for members on our website. So during this pandemic, we have really stepped up our member services. We have actually, somebody counted it up, and we've had like 270 in virtual meetings during this time period. And, you know, most of our members administer the unemployment insurance program. So you can imagine that a lot of focus has been on the unemployment insurance program over the last year. But I really am excited to just share with this group, and we really have hit a turning point. Something happened in the last 3 weeks, and the focus shifted from unemployment insurance to workforce. I think that the April jobs report certainly was a part of that, but it really has seen a sudden shift. And I think that this discussion has emerged as very timely. So in the last 3 weeks, we've had 21 states all of a sudden opt out of the federal unemployment insurance programs. And we have 4 states, and I wouldn't be surprised if we see more, that over the last, probably just the last 2 weeks, have started return to work incentive programs. So we've definitely seen this shift. We have regular member calls. We started having them every other week during the pandemic. We actually started out every week. And last week's discussion really centered around this opting out of the federal unemployment insurance benefits and return to work programs, and also looking at the need in states, and some states are doing this, the need for an economic analysis of challenges with the labor market, specifically barriers for workers, because that's what we're hearing about is labor challenges as in labor shortages. So it's just really a timely discussion. So like Western Governors Association, we are nonpartisan, bipartisan, and there's actually a lot that we can agree on, as you know. So because of this renewed emphasis on workforce development, we sent a letter to the Hill at the end of last month emphasizing our priorities. And we've had discussions with both the Senate Health, Education, Labor and Pensions Committee and the House Education and Labor Committee. And we're going to talk about these in some later detail in this discussion. But I just wanted to emphasize some of this, the high level themes. In the last panel, I really enjoyed listening to them about broadband. That is still a high priority. And, you know, also a high priority for us is to make sure that any additional funding goes through traditional funding streams. You know, we have processes in place on the education and training side, and short-term episodic or grant programs can be really challenging for states to administer. So, you know, making sure that that, you know, the funding opportunities don't disrupt planning and hiring or waste time on starting up. And also, you know, sometimes when you have grant programs, it's a challenge for states that don't have the grant resources. So really want to emphasize that for us, having the priorities through existing program hiring funding streams is essential. I know that we're going to be talking about apprenticeships, and apprenticeship continues to be a high area of priority, and I look forward to that discussion here. So I will turn it back to you, Stephanie.
Thank you, Julie. Thanks for that great overview and the update. We were just talking, I don't even know if it was 2 weeks ago, that Montana was one of the very first states to say no thank you to that additional unemployment insurance. So there you go, the West leading again in the United States. So thank you for that. And now we're going to go over to David. David is going to talk with us about the great work that the community colleges, the American Association of Community Colleges, and the important critical element of education and training. David.
Uh, Thanks so much, Stephanie, for having me. And thanks, Lauren, also for inviting me, and the Western Governors for having me. It's really an honor to be with you this afternoon on behalf of the American Association of Community Colleges. And my organization is a member organization, and it's community colleges themselves that are our members. That decision is generally made by the president or chancellor of the institution, and we have most of the colleges, about 90% of the colleges across the country are members of my organization, and so we have close ties with the broad array of community colleges, and we advocate pretty much exclusively at the federal level on their behalf. And I sometimes laugh when I get introduced as being the person who leads the advocacy efforts of the America's Community Colleges institutions. If only everything David Baime said what they would do, but that's just the way that the process works. We're happy to have our members, and of course they're very engaged in what we do. So I think Julie's presentation touched on a lot of things that I was going to mention, so I'm going to be brief. This is an extraordinary time for community colleges because of the pandemic. The pandemic, as was stated, has enhanced a lot of the things and accelerated a lot of the changes that were already being seen in community colleges and in higher education more broadly. But the pandemic did have a more acute and more negative impact on community colleges than other sectors of higher education because of the nature of our student body, which is generally speaking more economically disadvantaged population than other types of institutions, although that of course is a broad generalization. So we lost last fall, we lost 10.1% of our students nationally. In the spring term, according to the National Student Clearinghouse, we lost 11.4% of our students, which is just a shocking percentage of our students. Enrollments had been on the decline for a number of years, and four-year institutions were enrolling students that community colleges in truth thought that they should have been enrolling, but they were choosing to go to four-year colleges for reasons I won't speculate on here. But I think as most people with us this afternoon are aware, community colleges are about being very close to the ground, about being very tied into the workforce, about providing training opportunities for jobs that are available now or will be available in very short order. And also related to that, playing some role in economic development with organizations like those represented by Julie and some of the other, many of the people I know who are at this meeting, to try to make sure that the colleges are, as my boss likes to say, aware of where the puck is going as opposed to where it is in terms of jobs. It's a very, very complicated, important, consequential decision that the colleges have to make because resources are not unlimited. And so as you think about policy, we and you think about this general area, we want to make sure, and we think policymakers should be sure as well, that training funds are allocated in ways that do lead to good jobs, and that the means that the colleges need to determine those jobs, particularly in the form of data and information, are being provided. And we've made some progress in that at the federal level, but not as much as we would like to. Just going to mention a couple other things because I know we want to get to discussion. The issue of the skills gap that Julie referred to, a very real issue for community colleges and something that we have confronted. And it was an irony that even in the depths of the pandemic-induced recession, we were still very aware of employers having job openings for one of having skilled workers. So that is absolutely a reality that community colleges are focused on every day. But again, as I said, identifying the resources to do it and generating training programs is not an easy thing to do. Technology is very costly for one thing, so we do look for support on that. And then maybe just a couple of things I want to mention. It was already mentioned, but the digital divide was highlighted in the pandemic. One thinks about it generally in the rural context, but in fact, it's not limited to that, that there are urban institutions where people don't have either the resources or the availability of access to broadband, and so are find themselves having difficulty doing their lessons. I mean, you can't do a lesson very well on an iPhone, which most people do have. And then finally, particularly because I'm speaking to this group of Western governors, is that rural colleges in our mind present unique challenges for the colleges at the same time that they play an essential role, because rural economic development is even more difficult than doing it in urban areas where there are more resources easily at hand. And so the role that colleges play in trying to enhance the economic development that I mentioned a moment ago, work with businesses, work with workforce development boards, work with regional economic development agencies in an effort to try to draw business in, to try to stimulate economic activity, to try to promote entrepreneurial activity on the part of the local citizens. That's really a challenge. It's a very, very important aspect of what the colleges do, particularly because rural equates to small, and small doesn't allow the same economies of scale that larger institutions have. So they really have their work cut out for them. But as I say, they're essential. One final reason is that they often serve as the major cultural center and convening center in a way that sometimes urban institutions aren't. They do that, but it's not. I think it's fair to say it's not quite as important in those other contexts. So thanks again for having me, and I'll look forward to the discussion.
Thank you, David. And being a person who grew up in an extremely rural part of Colorado, I couldn't agree more on the critical role that our community colleges play across every part of our states, but especially in the rural communities. Oftentimes, they are the only higher education institution for hours and hours of driving, and they provide a hub of activity in communities. They are not only an education institution. And so I couldn't agree more with you on that point. And with that, I want to turn it over to Nova. Nova Gattman is going to give us a perspective from a state's perspective. And Nova is with the State Workforce Investment Board, which is much more than just that in Washington. But let me turn it over to you, Nova, for your overview.
All right. Thank you, Stephanie. So hello, I'm Nova Gattman. I'm the Deputy Director for External Affairs at Washington State's Workforce Board. Nice to be here. I was actually last a presenter for the Western Governors Association back in a meeting in 2018 in Oklahoma City. Yeah, I appreciate being invited back. And I was laughing thinking about this last night. The food is way better in Oklahoma City than it is at my house where I'm currently presenting from. So I had a laugh about that. So I am here, as Stephanie noted, to provide the state perspective on how we are in Washington, looking at ways within the workforce system to help people come out of some of the massive challenges of this pandemic whole, or perhaps even better off than before. And one of the reasons I'm here in particular and was invited to join this group, Washington has been looking at future of work issues for some time. And this last year, I think we all can know that the future hit us hard in the last year. And we were largely unprepared as a nation, as a world, for some of the challenges that would be faced with remote work, with distance learning, access to technology, broadband, major issues in our nation's unemployment, safety net, and benefit structures. And all of these were things that were discussed in our 2019 report of our Future of Work Task Force, which was run by my agency, the State Workforce Board. And I supervised that project for our agency, and it included 2 full-time co-managers for the group over a 2-year project. So we were the first state in the nation to convene a legislative group focused on this issue. And we spent 2 years really digging into future of work issues, from business pressure to use AI or automating jobs, the need for worker training and lifelong learning, and worker benefits and quality of life. And this is a fascinating project, and I'm finding that it's still so relevant today. It's a 2-year-old report, but we're still talking about it. And we even passed a bill this year that was one of the Future Work Task Force recommendations. And so it really highlighted the range of issues that still need to be considered as we're rebuilding our economy. So the task force, and I'll share in chat when I'm done speaking, link to the task force report so you can take a look. But it came up with 5 broad policy areas and then 17 specific recommendations under those policy areas. So I won't go through them all, but I wanted to highlight the 5 areas there. So we looked at enhanced worker training and lifelong learning opportunities. Looked at understanding and setting guidelines on deploying advanced technologies, starting with the state government workforce. We looked at how to modernize worker support systems to support the changing nature of work and then increasing career mobility for many individuals. 4, reimagining career and credentialing pathways to allow for validation and comparison of the value of education opportunities. And then finally, number 5, deploying economic development resources to support small and mid-sized businesses, especially in our more rural regions. So I encourage you, I'll drop it in chat here in a moment, encourage you to take a look at the report. We are still getting interest in the background. There's quite a bit of background and how we came to our conclusions that might be of use to you even now. A few other areas that I just want to highlight that might be of interest to the attendees and provide a bit more of the Washington story here and how we've responded to the past year and what we're thinking for the future. So first, I want to talk about our state's financial aid system. It's our Washington College Grant, and we've really put a lot of thought and investment into our state's financial aid program over the last few years. And this is an important component in helping our people retrain or improve their skills to find those family-sustaining jobs. In 2019, with support from some of our key members in our state's business community, we were able to fund $1 billion for state post-secondary financial aid over 4 years. And that was through that Washington College Grant. And the fund, it provides not only support for the more traditional 2- and 4-year programs, but also support for certificates, registered apprenticeships, more typical workforce programs. And we have no age limit to access the funding. It can benefit an 18-year-old that's fresh out of high school or a 45-year-old mid-career worker who's looking for skills improvement or credential attainment. The other one I want to highlight for you is our state's youth work-based learning efforts, and that's called Career Connect Washington. And this is a major initiative of the governor and has become our statewide framework on career-connected learning. And this is a critical aspect of preparing for the future of work. These work-based, or as we call it in Washington, career-connected learning opportunities. So one of the things that we highlighted in our Future of Work report, 65% of the jobs that today's kindergartners will hold when they become adults, they don't exist today. So it's critical that we're coming up with the ability for these young people to be able to pivot and have those skills to understand the broader picture here. And the goal of Career Connect Washington, ensuring that every student in Washington, every young person is participating in career connected learning. The program, it includes regional teams at every level who are developing and building capacity in the sectors across the state and increased enrollment funding as well. Our state legislature just invested $30 million into this program in the last budget to increase access for young people to participate, particularly in what are called career launch programs. Programs are combining paid work experience with a post-secondary credential or a year of college credit. And we've done a lot of work in connecting with local employers and creating more opportunities, including a big expansion of the industries that are supporting registered apprenticeship in our states, from healthcare to building operations. And by engaging those champions in different business sectors, they're bringing their colleagues together and having their own conversations about what the business community can do to help bring our young people into the future of work, essentially. So I'll stop there. Very much looking forward to the conversation today.
That's great. Thank you so much, Nova. And finally, last but absolutely not least, I'll pass it over to Michele. Michele is with the International Association of Bridge Structural, Ornamental, and Reinforcing Ironworkers, and also does a lot of work in the energy sector. And so, Michele, would you please provide your overview for us?
Yes, thanks, Stephanie. I know that's a mouthful. I like to say I'm Michele from the Ironworkers International. But yeah, the name has gotten longer. I have been with the Ironworkers for 21 years now, and as work has expanded and scopes have expanded in jurisdictions, so has our official name, which you just tackled. So the great job. So I am Michele Friska. I work specifically on state and local policy and government relations across the nation. I actually am a Western girl, born and raised in California, and I now live in Washington State. A member out here in Spokane, Washington, and started my career with the Ironworkers back in 2000. And at the time, I covered 5 Western states, expand out to 9 Northwestern states, and now happily serve all 50. I appreciate being included on this panel today. Like I said, not just for integrating into the WGA and having this invitation, but also as a Western person, I realize the uniqueness of our states. So much of our land is rural that getting these training and education opportunities is really key, and getting to people where they're at is really key. And that is a challenge that we have in the unions with our apprenticeship programs today. I think of states like Montana right off the bat, where we're trying to train people across that vast state for projects that are just enormous, with only 2 training facilities in the state. So those are some of our unique training challenges that we have. But again, to meet the needs of our employers and our members, we have to find a way to get to them. So that does include employing the use of mobile training trailers, partnering with our community colleges, getting creative in the virtual world, those different things that we can do. And I do want to just make a comment really quick, piggyback on something Nova said, being here in Washington State too. Our apprenticeship programs a few years ago, just as she said, came into funding in order for our apprentices to complete their college degrees in construction management by completing 1 course at WSU. And that is thanks to the hard work of people like Nova and the state government to make sure that is happening. So we do appreciate that. And those are really unique type skills that our members can then take in to start their own businesses, to be honest with you. So the union is not in business without our employers. So we appreciate all the hard work that our employers do and our members bring to the table. So the Ironworkers run a federally registered apprenticeship program throughout the nation. Traditionally, we think of building trades construction workers, especially the ironworkers, as working on bridges, roads, high-rise buildings, etc. And that's all true. We do all of that. But our infrastructure work is extensive, from traditional infrastructure needs, ports, expansions, refineries, different delivery methods of energy, etc. We do all of that. And now that we're going into this new new environment, we have had to rethink our training and our training standards. So our training does consist of a mixture of on-the-job training and classroom education. Today, we've expanded in order to meet this rapidly changing workforce, especially in the renewable energy sector. So I know that, when we think back to 2008, 2009, when we're coming out of a big recession, we had a big mortality gap as far as union members to get back to work. And so we had to address that then as well. How do we re-educate our workers that have not been working? And now we have to really kind of take that mindset too and think, how do we re-educate our workers from a traditional construction mindset to renewable energy and the future of work and what our scope is going to look like in the future. So we've really tried to tackle that in our training programs. Our training programs are privately funded as a joint management venture between the union and our employers. So that is one great thing about that. And when we look at this new environment that we're going into, we also have to consider a little bit of a look back. We have traditional facilities that still have to be maintained, like high hazardous facilities and the nuclear facilities that have already wound up. So we do have specialized workers in those fields. What we're doing today, though, is we're really developing a new workforce to talk about and address wind, both on and offshore, solar, hydrothermal, natural gas, and any new nuclear standards that are coming up and will be introduced. When I look at the solar and wind projects that we're tracking, we track top 50 across the state in each industry. And outside of California, which does kind of have its own solar industry going, 29 of the top 50 projects are in the Western states, and 37 of the onshore wind programs are in Western states. So this is a huge requirement here in our states, where you're talking about needing certified welders and riggers, capable rod busters, erectors, connectors, and state and federally certified workers on safety procedures and proper policy on these work sites. Those are huge, and those are all things that we have expanded our apprenticeship to cover. So, like I said, I'm bringing it back. I think of Montana immediately. Montana, thankfully, and I love Montana and the governor there. It was the first state that I got to go back and work on the ground in this year, so I'm very thankful. And one of the things I think of right away in Montana is we're shutting down the coal strips, but we're also starting a 2 gigawatt solar project. So we have to go from shutting down coal fire to starting solar. And there's great potential across the whole Western states. The other great thing about our rural states is they're prime for solar. And so that has been the great thing. And then the other thing we need to think about is there's been a handful of states that have already passed legislation that prohibit coal fire energy. And some of that goes into effect next year. So we have to go from a transition of not only shutting down coal fire, but keeping up with being able to provide energy to the states that prohibit it. So those are some strong mixtures that we have to get together and get on really, really fast. And we're trying to do that as fast as we can here.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Michele. We really appreciate that. So great overview from each of our panelists. I do want to encourage folks to put some questions in the chat. I've seen one come through so far. We're going to start out with some of the questions that I had prepared to ask all of you first, and then we'll move on to some of those as they're coming into the chat. So first, how has the pandemic, and I think, Michele, I'm going to start, I know you just finished last, but I'm going to start with you first. Thinking about what you just said about this transition from clean energy and how the workforce demands are changing, building upon that, how has the pandemic affected the labor market and opportunities for people to move into good careers? How do these changes fit into the broader set of trends that we refer to as the future of work? And each of our panelists talked about that. So I want to give anyone that wants to chime in a chance, but Michele, why don't you go ahead and build upon what you were already saying there?
Yeah, so this is a huge, obviously we're moving into developing a new workforce for these new jobs that are coming. We do have a lot of members that were working and a lot of members who were out of work this last year, which obviously depressed our ability to train and fill these new jobs. You're thinking it's May now, we have 7 months to meet some of these deadlines. That's huge. So I think that the union itself and the training, we face the same problems that everyone else did in the pandemic by not being able to get to our members or to get where they're at or get them to us. Additionally, depending on the area of the country they're in, having entire facilities and job sites shut down stops training in its tracks. It doesn't just stop the work and the paycheck, it stops the training. A lot of our stuff is hands-on. We do as much as we can virtually, but to really make this transition, we do have to get hands-on. And I am, I'm very happy with the way that our industry has particularly dealt with it. I know that the iron workers and other construction industries, we already dealt with a great deal of PPE and safety. So that transition was a little bit better. I'm not going to say easier, but perhaps better to get our workforce to really be on board with complying with different state and federal regulations regarding safety. But to really take these opportunities, we really are in a position where we're like any other business, and we have to recruit people and show them what this industry is going to be. Our average age of our apprentice is 29 years old. That means we're retraining. So we really have to get in there and find where these new specialized workers are going to be. And I think it was great that what Nova said, that the kindergartners today, or I'm sorry, was it Nova or was it you, Stephanie, who said,
No, it's Nova.
that said the kindergartners today, their careers don't even exist yet.
Yeah.
You know, that is amazing. And when you think of these facilities we're talking about, yes, the iron workers, we're going to build them and move on. But the people that will have to maintain them afterwards to make sure they work and they're producing energy and they don't shut down, those are the people we have to get to and train as well.
That's excellent. Would any of the other panelists like to chime in on this question? Go ahead, Nova.
So thank you, and Michele, I was born in Spokane, Washington, and so I grew up there. Spent my first 18 years in Spokane. So I loved hearing that in your intro comments there. So on this one, you know, one of the things, and the last panel really went into detail on the need for broadband access in these, particularly in rural areas, and this is paramount importance in an economy that's already overwhelmingly digital. You all know that, of course, but you know, we would add too that it's not just the broadband access. It's the three legs of the digital equity stool here that we're talking about. So broadband, access to technology, hardware, equipment, software, and then also the digital literacy to use and thrive with technology. Looking at remote work, so this is another important thought here, and we know from the pandemic that people can do many jobs from all over the world, and this opens up access dramatically for recruitment and opportunities, but part of this is you know, we might look at how can we have our state's workforce system looking at developing the necessary skills and competencies to help people work better remotely, or if folks are looking at independent contracting or entrepreneurship, what skills and abilities do we need to hone so that they can be effective in those roles, including the business side of the house, payroll and all that. So, you know, we've really been talking about this as an idea to help our workforce system better prepare people for the changing and changed nature of work.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with you on that, Nova. And really thinking about how can we embrace what we've learned, the increased comfort level with remote work, I mean, we all love meeting each other in person, and that there's nothing like that real handshake, right? But so much can get done, and we have learned about that. And so I'm just wondering, David, from the point of view of adult learners and the role of the community colleges and other, and not just the associate's degree, but short-term training programs, where do you see all of that fitting in with the future of work and workforce development in that perspective?
Yeah, well, it's something that, you know, keeps our presidents, you know, focused all day long, if not up at night. And that was, I mentioned in my comments, you know, the need for them to figure out as best they can what the jobs are going to be in the future. And then, you know, we heard the comment about the kindergartners. I do want to go back to what Noah was just talking about in terms of the work that will be done through digital means and remotely as we move out of the pandemic, because it has fundamentally changed the way that our colleges do work, or changed to a very large degree. And every indication it's fascinating to me, every indication is that the colleges are simply going to be offering far more opportunities for students to study online than they did previously. When you consider that the institutions went from being predominantly delivering education online, you know, on March 13th of last year, to doing it almost 100% immediately, although some programs quickly became delivered in person. A lot of some of the technical programs where there really isn't much of an option, and of course states approach this issue differently as well. But that abrupt transition is, I believe, will have a lasting impact. And of course, the colleges themselves have gotten you know, better at delivering the education. Faculty in particular, many of them hadn't, you know, had eschewed that opportunity, and then they had no choice, and they're finding out in many cases that they're liking it. I think what though we are learning in terms of your question, Stephanie, is that the particularly the adult students, people who are in the workforce now, which are probably going to be the largest population that community colleges are going to be, new population that we're going to be enrolling. I mentioned in my opening comments about the enrollment declines that we've experienced in the pandemic. They have been concentrated on younger and first-time students. And just given the nature of the economy and the demands on the workforce, we know that it's really the students who are already working and older, and our average age is 28 years old, who are going to need to access community colleges. And what we're finding, and we've learned some good lessons in the pandemic, are the services those students require. I mean, some of them are some of them are mental health, frankly, but then those services have been expanded quite significantly. Some of it was done with the federal funds that were provided, but also academic supports. And those have been, there always have been something that colleges have focused on increasingly, but to do it in a digital environment for all of the students has caused the colleges to focus more on making sure that they're doing, providing all the supports that students need, which to a large extent is just staying in their faces. To just making sure that they are in constant contact with the institutions, that the faculty are making sure that students are engaged or someone else at the institution. And then finally, in terms of these adult students, is that, as one of my presidents puts it, time is the enemy of these people who are in the workforce and maybe have families. And so you want to make the programs as compressed as they could possibly be made to dovetail or fit with their schedule and their needs. And also, of course, to develop career ladders that enable students to get a shorter term certificate or an industry certification, and then build on that with successive education at the institution at some later point. And that's easier said than done, but it's something that the colleges really want to do emphasize, because they want to make sure that students who just take an 8-week or 12-week training program, as valuable as that can be, that can lead them to other career opportunities. Because one final thing I'll just mention on this is that although we talked a lot about workforce training, all the evidence suggests that a lot of the basic academic programs, the analytical programs, both the English side of the curriculum and the mathematical side of the curriculum, are very important for long-term ability for workers to learn on the job. Like probably a lot of people attending this meeting have done, they've picked up various skills. They maybe go back to school for them, but they're doing things differently, certainly online and digitally than they did when they started working. So that's a little bit in that area.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I find it interesting that, you're at the average age of a community college student is 28. The average age of one of Michele's apprentices is 29. I see some real collaboration there. And so I want us to transition to kind of thinking about, the whole role of work-based learning as an important component in closing and keeping closed the skills gap. But before I do that, I just noticed that Julie had unmuted. So Julie, I want to give you a chance to chime in on the previous question that we just had.
I'll be very brief. I just wanted to emphasize some very high level ways that in the workforce system, this acceleration of the future of work is impacted. And it's really through the virtual services, similar to what David was talking about, even shorter term, very basic workforce training has now been changed to virtual. People used to have to go into the one stop to take some basic IT classes or, kind of pre-community college type classes. Those switched to virtual. We've seen an amazing shift to virtual reemployment requirements that never used to be virtual. We have virtual job clubs, virtual job shadowing, virtual career fairs. So, and this acceleration trend we might see some shift back to some in person, but I think these technologies are here to stay. So I just wanted to make sure that everybody knows this has really hit all aspects of the workforce system.
Yes, that is such a valid point. And there is an example. We were doing some research to document a lot of those innovative examples for delivering virtual services. And there are some examples of some states that even started doing drive-through career fairs or drive-through interviewing, where someone could drive up in their car, never get out, and go from booth to different employers that were protected as well. And so I've been very impressed with the innovations that I have seen happening across the country around workforce development, and really that connection between employers and workers, and the opportunity to make that connection. I'm glad that you added that, Julie, because I think it is critically important. And we really need to pat our workforce systems and our community colleges and our career and technical education systems and everyone on the back for, as I think David was the one that said, there were some folks that really resisted that whole idea of virtual or remote, and they, when put in a situation where they had to get used to it, they had to adapt, they had to do it, they did great. They were adaptable, they were flexible, they were innovative, and hopefully that'll be the silver lining of all of this, right? That we can learn from that and grow and expand. And so with that, let's transition to talking a little bit about how all of this plays into work-based learning. So several of the projects I work on are an apprenticeship, and especially an apprenticeship in non-traditional industries like technology, and really roles that touch every single business in every industry. And I know, Julie, since you're just right there, NASWA has an apprenticeship affinity group that meets on a regular basis. And one of the challenge I've heard some of the folks talk about is just this, layoffs and getting people back to work. And how do you deal with that when it was an apprenticeship? Or how do you, what impact is all of this having on apprenticeship, and what are states doing to be innovative in that realm? And not just, all work-based learning, but I do know that you guys have that apprenticeship group.
We do. And, individuals in the states who work on apprenticeship, if you're interested, you can send me an email. And, this affinity group really does a great job of sharing promising practices. And, it has really been just a challenge. And, Michele knows more about this than I do from, the ground level. But, keeping these programs going, we see that apprenticeship is really just a solid, it's been a high legislative priority for the past several administrations. And, from our members' view, we just really need to have sustained funding for apprenticeships. And, it's just not enough at the current time. So with more focus on it, we're hoping that coming out of the pandemic, we'll see more involvement and growth. There's definitely, the interest is there across the country.
Right. And one of the reasons I'm so passionate about apprenticeship is because I do see it as this great place where workforce development, community colleges, and industry come together and collaborate to do that integrated learning. I always think back to when I was in high school and they told me I had to take a geometry class, and I said, why in the world do I need geometry? When am I ever going to use that in my life? And probably took 10 years before I said, oh, that's when I'm going to use this in my life. And with apprenticeship, you get to learn it and do it and learn it and do it. And so I'm just curious for any of the panelists, where do you see that alignment and opportunity in this current environment to leverage all of these different systems working better together around work-based learning opportunities? Michele?
Yeah, oh, sorry, I had unmuted to comment on Julie. Me personally, if you want to be an iron worker, I can sign you up. We got that. But I would love to see a registered apprenticeship in every industry. These non-traditional industries, like I understand the push for it and the need for it. Just getting people properly trained and to work. We have such great opportunities for partnerships, not only with the states, but specifically with the community colleges. We rely heavily on our community colleges in our apprenticeship. And so I would love to actually to hear a little bit more from David, especially what, like you noted, Stephanie, is that the age that we're re-educating at is about the same. So really being able to have those good partnerships with the community college and VOTAX and the CTE programs is really, really important to us. And I'll say, you took geometry in high school. They made me take shop, and now it's gone. And look who learned to weld. So it's very important to me as well to see it filtering down to our CTE programs and working with our vocational and community colleges to get people into this workforce. So yeah, I just need to comment on that. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you very much, Michele. David, do you have thoughts on that? And then Nova had offered to share some information on a healthcare apprenticeship. We'll go there next.
Well, Stephanie, to what you said, absolutely, the apprenticeship is kind of the ideal type of cooperation between the colleges and business. What is, I think, a little bit different now about the community, what our colleges are doing is that they are more with funding, because they are expensive to get going. They are more inclined to develop the programs themselves and sponsor the programs themselves, and rather than just providing the related technical instruction as part of the programs. And one of the reasons why they're doing that is because of their nature is to try to bring in as diverse a population as they can, and they are trying to do this in some new areas with some of the maybe more non-traditional types of students enrolled in those programs. One thing I'm going to say, and Michele, you can't lob any tomatoes at me because now we're all remote, is that we do hear we all know the value of apprenticeship programs and the great things that we do, but I would lie or be remiss if I didn't say that some of our presidents say, geez, there's an awful lot of requirements associated with these. And to get back to your question, Stephanie, that apprenticeship is kind of the gold standard for work-based learning, no denying the benefits of that. But there are other ways of providing something that is very relevant, very helpful on the job type training, work-based learning for students, whether it's through internships or whether it's through some kind of cooperative agreement, whether it's through, as is not infrequent, the industry sends the faculty to the college to do the educating there. So, which maybe isn't always as good. And that of course raises the issue about facilities and equipment. But I guess what I'm saying is that while we definitely want to break out and do more apprenticeships, when we are very happy about the additional resources that are being provided, that we also want to look at ways of making it a little bit easier to do what's not really an apprenticeship per se, a registered apprenticeship, but that just to integrate work-based learning more and more into the programs.
Yeah, absolutely, David. And thank you for saying that. I'm a huge advocate for the full work-based learning continuum. And it's just like all education. We're not telling anyone, don't go get a 4-year degree. What we're saying is there need to be multiple paths to success, and no one path works for any individual person. And you should be able to hop in and out wherever you're at in your life and go in and get that additional education or training whenever you're ready for it. And the same goes for work-based learning. Registered apprenticeship is great, and so are all of the other work-based learning opportunities along that continuum of work-based learning. We need all of it. We need people being educated and getting an opportunity to apply those skills on the job while they're learning. Nova, you wanted to share an experience in the healthcare sector.
Sure, thank you. So I wanted to highlight an effort that we're engaging in Washington, looking at creating a long-term care registered apprenticeship program. And Washington was hit pretty hard the early days of the pandemic. Folks remember Washington had the first case, and the virus raged through one particular long-term care facility, and it was a pretty scary time. And long-term care is an area that really did struggle with recruitment and retention even before the pandemic showed the vulnerabilities of the workers and the sector. At the same time, this massive unemployment situation, it also created a potential silver lining for this sector, as the access to these frontline healthcare positions are relatively low barrier, and the occupations are in demand across the state. But what we've been working on is we realized we really did need to create the hooks to keep folks in these roles. These are mostly entry level, minimum wage or a little higher paying jobs, and they're tough jobs in many cases. So part of that was to help folks understand that there would be a pathway for them to advance into higher level roles and wages. We see a lot of diversity at the entry level in long-term care, but the percentages start to drop off as you have higher education time and costs and the need to take time off from work to complete the program. So we've been working on developing a long-term care apprenticeship program, and it would bridge the gap between nursing assistants and licensed practical nursing. So it's an earn and learn model for our entry-level staff at long-term care facilities, would allow them to continue working and then progressively earning more wages as they move through a licensed practical nurse registered apprenticeship program. So things are moving. We received state funding, the budget that was just signed yesterday, to begin the planning for this work. We're also working with our congressional delegation on the congressionally directed spending process, the former earmark process, to get funding for this, both with our senators and the local congressmen in the area in central Washington that we've highlighted. And we're working with the local community and technical college there to put together this program. Got a lot of support from folks. So we're really hoping that, we can have a good, strong pilot in this area if we get our federal funding to launch the program. But we think it's a matter of time on this. And, hopefully this could be a statewide or even nationwide model for training licensed practical nurses and addressing some of the long-term care gaps we have.
That's great, Nova. And it makes me just wonder, Julie, do you have any other quick examples of innovative practices in any other states related to reemployment? You really said there's been this real shift with the 21 states that said no to the additional unemployment insurance. Could you share a couple other examples of reemployment initiatives?
Well, I'm going to do that. I'm also going to put in the chat. We finished, I think it was kind of in late February, early March, a state of the workforce report. And this is a kind of a profile of every state workforce agency. It's also very handy for those of you involved with state policy in this area, because on each page, it shows which programs are in which workforce agency. So we know every single state is different as to how they're organized. And this is kind of helpful. And so I'll put that in the chat. The State of the Workforce Report also includes some high-level statistics on unemployment insurance, which are really interesting, and you might want to use it if you're ever talking to some group, because some of them are rather staggering. I kind of touched on some of the innovations, really seeing things move toward virtual in incredible time. So I mentioned that the virtual job clubs. We've seen focus on reentry programs, either, connecting individuals who are incarcerated with employers while they're still behind the fence. That has been a real area of focus. We've seen an innovation in the delivery of reemployment services. So I'm going to share this. Each state was asked to share one or two or three innovations. So in the interest of time, I'll put that in the chat, and hopefully
Awesome.
People will enjoy it.
Thank you, Julie. I appreciate that. And we had a question from the audience about the hospitality industry. Knowing that the hospitality industry was probably the hardest hit industry in the pandemic, and as is under this pressure now as people are getting comfortable traveling again, but yet they don't have the workers. Any thoughts around best practices or things that are happening across the country related to the hospitality industry and getting the workers that they need, and also the folks who were laid off during that situation, getting them reemployed? Any thoughts that people would like to share on that?
I'll just throw out that, and this is not a direct answer to that question because I don't know enough about the industry, but I do know that hospitality programs, which are very expensive for the colleges to deliver, were nevertheless being added, in the run up to the pandemic, at a good clip, pretty much across the country, in all sorts of places that you wouldn't necessarily have expected then. So clearly, there was a demand for that type of trained individual in rural areas too, and in smaller town areas as well as big cities. So I guess I'm just hopeful that the industry, which obviously has been hit really hard in the pandemic, will come back, and that those types of programs will be popular in the coming years once again.
Great. Any thoughts from anyone else?
I would just like to share, I know that in Oregon, they recently did some analysis on where their worker shortages are coming from.
Mhm.
And I think really looking to the extent the states can at their data can help kind of understand in a little finer detail what the challenges are. And we've seen a lot of state workforce agencies really connecting to community groups to encourage workers who might have been hesitant to go back to the workforce, or how we can help individuals with barriers to employment. Really overcoming those barriers is a focus right now.
Yeah, that makes sense, Julie. Well, I want to wrap us up with one final question for each of you. So I would like to, and we'll go in reverse order of our earlier opening questions. And so just a warning, Michele, we'll start with you. But I would really, in thinking about all of the energy that there is in Washington, D.C. right now around workforce development, with the Americans Jobs Plan and Congress preparing to take up legislation to reauthorize WIA, so much conversation around apprenticeship. And then also with governors really tackling how do they deal with all of these different challenges related to recovery and retraining and upskilling and balancing so many priorities on their plates. What investments would you most like to see the federal government make, and strategies that you would like to see, strategies that you'd like to see governors in the Western United States implement? Go ahead, Michele.
Well, I think we're on week 228 of Infrastructure Week. So I am still infrastructure. Yes, the American Jobs Plan, we would love to see it or a version of it go into effect. We need to get back to work, and we need to rebuild our bridges and roads, ports, waterways, all those things that still we are severely deficient in our infrastructure. So yes, so I am very, very hopeful that not only on the federal level, but so many governors have really taken this in hand and addressed it themselves. So I appreciate and applaud all the governors and your staffs out here for all the legislation that you've been pushing the last several years to make sure that our states are on par and where they need to be. So just continuing down that path, I would love to say, yes, we're going to get a good infrastructure package. We're going to get great funding. But really the best way to do this is to do it ourselves. And that's what the states have been doing. Not that we don't want the federal government's help, but to just say, we are going to rebuild and equip ourselves for the future at the state level is really what I encourage everyone to keep doing. And we would love to be partners with you to make that happen, find innovative ways to do that, and continue to tackle that problem. So here's to week 229 of Infrastructure Week. Let's just keep going.
Awesome. Thank you. Nova, your quick thoughts?
Sure. So the biggest thing for us is we really do struggle with providing services in the workforce development system. We struggle with providing services across multiple program offerings. So there's a lot of silos that are artificially built into the workforce development system, in the intake, in performance metrics that don't encourage cooperation, but encourage single point in time results. So biggest ticket item for us is that, looking at any federal investment in workforce or workforce legislation, better helping the states align systems and look at integration by providing some guidance and support in aligning data systems. And this is a wonky one, but this is a major problem that we keep talking about in Washington, particularly between the workforce or education, higher education, or the health and human services borders. So that, for us, that would be really critical.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more. David?
Yes, I mean, I could spend a lot of time talking about this data issue, which is cropping up as we're supposed to wrap up, because it's incredibly important, and we're in an incredibly suboptimal position with huge consequences. And a lot of what's going on is that private entities are stepping into the void that's been left by the absence of effective national policies. Although some states have done good things, and just to reinforce Nova's point that absolutely we are aware of there being a lot of similar programs with different requirements, and that is to some extent an inefficient way of spending funds. And then to get to your question, Stephanie, what we would actually like to see is just direct funding to our colleges to work with businesses in concert with state and local agencies that can solidify or certify the need for trainees in particular areas, precisely to get around some of the bureaucratic impediments that were just mentioned. The truth is, we do job training to the best of our ability every day. We don't have the money to do it to the extent that would be good for the economy. So we'd like federal support, but we think that with again just being attached to what the labor market demands are going to be and businesses demands, that's a pretty good sort of triad of support from our perspective.
Thank you, David. And this time, last but not least, Julie.
So I agree with everything that was just said. Those are all top priorities. Flexibility for WIOA funding, more funding for the core workforce streams. There's just so much need out there. And the data aspect is really significant. We have state labor market information offices doing great work on just shoestring budgets that have been flat for so long. And in order for governors to really get the information they need, we need more funding for those state workforce information shops and the Federal Bureau of Labor Statistics, which has similarly had flat funding. So I think that, these are needs. We've been talking about some of the legislation. We're really excited to, push it to the next step, because there really are a lot of needs out there, but it's an exciting time as well.
Thank you. Excellent, excellent closing remarks. And thank you all so much for your great comments. With that, Lauren, I will turn it over to you. Thanks again, Lauren and Western Governors Association, for giving us all this opportunity to be a part of this very critical conversation.
Well, it is our pleasure. You guys were absolutely wonderful. Thank you so much for taking some time out of your busy schedules to enlighten us on some of these workforce challenges that we face. And I couldn't have asked for a better segue of you guys ending on the topic of data, because tomorrow we have 3 additional panels, the first of which is on evidence-based policymaking and data. And we'll also be talking about some of the workforce challenges and issues with silos in that context. So I hope that everyone will tune in again tomorrow. And then after that panel, we'll be doing discussions on disaster resilience and also telehealth. So those kick off tomorrow at 1 p.m. Mountain Time. And the Zoom link is going to be the same, but you'll get an email tomorrow morning sharing it again. So it's easy for you to find. So again, thank you. I really appreciate having you all here. It's great to see Nova and Stephanie again, and we'll see you all tomorrow.